A 27-year-old medical student walked into a bar on a Friday night and was never seen again. But here is what makes this case absolutely mind-bending. Security cameras captured him entering the building, yet he was never recorded leaving, and despite an 18-year investigation involving hundreds of officers, advanced forensic technology, and even the Federal Bureau of Investigation, no one can explain how someone simply vanishes from a secured location with only one public entrance and constant video surveillance. On April 1, 2006, Brian Randall Shaffer stepped through the doors of the Ugly Tuna Saloona in Columbus, Ohio. A decision that would transform him from a promising future doctor into one of America's most perplexing missing persons cases. The security footage from that night shows Brian riding an escalator to the second-floor bar at exactly 1:15 in the morning, chatting casually with friends, completely unaware that within 40 minutes he would disappear so completely that investigators would question the very laws of physics. What happened next defies all logical explanation and has left even the most experienced detectives scratching their heads for nearly 2 decades. Brian was captured on camera outside the bar at 1:55 in the morning, having a friendly conversation with 2 young women before walking off-screen toward the bar entrance. That was the last time anyone ever saw Brian Shaffer alive. When the bar closed at 2 o'clock in the morning, Brian was nowhere to be found among the departing crowd, yet the security cameras never showed him leaving the building. The Ugly Tuna Saloona was located on the second floor of the South Campus Gateway building, accessible only through one main entrance monitored by security cameras. There was a service exit, but it led to a dangerous construction zone that would have been nearly impossible to navigate while intoxicated. Every single person who left the bar that night was recorded by the cameras, every single person except Brian Shaffer. It was as if he had simply evaporated into thin air. This case has stumped investigators, fascinated true crime enthusiasts, and haunted Brian's family for 18 years. The Columbus Police Department deployed more than 50 officers at the height of the search. They brought in cadaver dogs, searched sewers, dredged rivers, and even convinced the city to let them explore the underground tunnel system. The Federal Bureau of Investigation analyzed facial recognition software on photographs from as far away as Mexico. Pearl Jam's lead singer Eddie Vedder made a public appeal for information during a concert. Yet despite all these efforts, Brian Shaffer remains missing. The question that continues to baffle everyone involved is devastatingly simple. How does someone walk into a building and never walk out? The laws of physics suggest it should be impossible, yet the video evidence is undeniable. Brian entered the Ugly Tuna Saloona at 1:15 in the morning on April 1, 2006. And he never left, at least not in any way that makes sense to investigators, his family, or anyone who has studied this case. What makes this disappearance even more puzzling is that Brian had everything to live for. He was months away from proposing to his girlfriend during a romantic trip to Miami. They had planned for spring break. His dream was to become a doctor by day and start a Jimmy Buffett-style band by night, playing music in tropical locations. He had overcome the recent death of his mother and was looking forward to the future with optimism and excitement. Yet somehow, on what should have been a simple night out celebrating the start of spring break, Brian Shaffer stepped into a mystery that continues to confound experts 18 years later. The case that was supposed to be solved within days has become one of the most enduring enigmas in modern criminal investigation, leaving behind more questions than answers and a family that still searches for the truth about what happened to their beloved son and brother. Brian Randall Shaffer grew up in the quiet suburb of Pickerington, Ohio, just outside Columbus, where he was raised by his parents Randy and Renee Shaffer alongside his younger brother Derek. From an early age, Brian exhibited the kind of dedication and intelligence that would eventually lead him to medical school, but he also possessed a free spirit that dreamed of tropical beaches and Jimmy Buffett's laid-back lifestyle. After graduating from Pickerington High School in 1997, Brian enrolled at Ohio State University to pursue his undergraduate studies. He chose microbiology as his major, a decision that reflected his growing interest in medicine and his desire to help others. Brian was the kind of student who took his studies seriously but never forgot to enjoy life along the way. His friends remember him as someone who could spend hours studying complex biological processes and then grab his guitar to play Pearl Jam songs late into the night. During his 6 years as an undergraduate, Brian developed a deep love for music, particularly the bands Pearl Jam and the tropical rock sounds of Jimmy Buffett. He was so passionate about Pearl Jam that he got their iconic stick figure logo tattooed on his right arm, a permanent reminder of how much their music meant to him. But it was Jimmy Buffett's carefree island lifestyle that truly captured Brian's imagination. He would often tell his friends that while he planned to become a doctor, his real dream was to start a band and play music in places like Key West or the Caribbean, where life moved at a slower pace and every day felt like a vacation. In 2003, Brian graduated from Ohio State with his degree in microbiology, and his academic excellence earned him acceptance into the prestigious Ohio State University College of Medicine. Starting medical school in 2004, Brian threw himself into his studies with the same dedication he had shown as an undergraduate. The coursework was demanding, and the pressure was intense, but Brian seemed to thrive in the challenging environment. It was during his second year of medical school that Brian met Alexis Wagoner, a fellow medical student who shared his passion for healing and helping others. Alexis was intelligent, beautiful, and driven, and she quickly became the center of Brian's world. Their relationship blossomed as they studied together, supported each other through the stress of medical school, and planned their future as doctors. Friends and family members who spent time with the couple could see that they were deeply in love and perfectly matched for each other. Brian often spoke about his future with Alexis, and those closest to him believed he was planning to propose marriage sometime in 2006. He had mentioned to friends that he wanted to create the perfect romantic moment, possibly during a tropical vacation where they could watch the sunset over the ocean. The couple had planned a spring break trip to Miami for early April, and many suspected that Brian might use that opportunity to pop the question. However, Brian's world was shaken in March of 2006, when his mother Renee lost her battle with myelodysplasia, a form of bone cancer that had been ravaging her body for months. Renee's death hit Brian particularly hard, because they had always been close, and she had been his biggest supporter throughout his academic journey. Friends noticed that while Brian appeared to be handling his grief well on the surface, his mother's death had deeply affected him in ways that were not immediately apparent. Despite his loss, Brian remained focused on his studies and his relationship with Alexis. He was determined to honor his mother's memory by becoming the doctor she had always believed he could be. At the same time, he continued to nurture his dreams of musical stardom, often joking with friends that he would be the first doctor to have a successful career in tropical rock music. Brian's father Randy noticed that his son seemed exhausted in the weeks leading up to spring break. The combination of intensive studying for crucial medical school exams, processing his grief over his mother's death, and planning his future with Alexis had taken a toll on the young man. Randy observed that Brian had been pulling all-nighters to cram for important tests, and he was concerned about his son's well-being. As March 31st, 2006 approached, Brian was looking forward to spring break as a chance to decompress and reconnect with Alexis during their Miami vacation. The winter quarter at medical school had been particularly challenging, and Brian was ready for some time away from textbooks and lecture halls. He had worked hard to ensure all his assignments were completed, and his exams were finished before the break began. The relationship between Brian and his roommate Clint Florence was solid, and the two had become good friends during their time in medical school together. Clint was someone Brian could rely on, and they often studied together or went out for drinks when the pressure of school became overwhelming. Their friendship was built on mutual respect and shared experiences of navigating the demanding world of medical education. On the evening of March 31st, Brian met with his father Randy for what would become their final dinner together. They went to a steakhouse to celebrate the end of the quarter and the beginning of spring break. Randy later recalled that Brian seemed tired but excited about his upcoming trip with Alexis. They talked about Brian's plans for the future, his continuing grief over his mother's death, and his hopes for a relaxing vacation in Miami. As the evening progressed, Brian mentioned that he planned to go out with Clint later that night to blow off some steam before their Monday morning flight to Miami. Randy had some reservations about Brian going out when he was already exhausted, but he did not want to interfere with his adult son's decisions. Looking back, Randy would forever wonder if expressing his concerns might have changed the course of that night's events. Friday night in Columbus, Ohio, buzzed with the energy that only comes at the end of a grueling academic quarter. Students flooded the bars and restaurants near Ohio State University's campus, ready to celebrate their freedom from exams and textbooks. For Brian Shaffer, March 31st, 2006, represented the perfect opportunity to unwind after months of intensive studying and emotional stress following his mother's death. At 9 o'clock in the evening, Brian met his roommate Clint Florence at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a popular bar located on the second floor of the South Campus Gateway complex on High Street. The venue was known for its lively atmosphere and strong drinks, making it a favorite among Ohio State students looking to celebrate or forget their academic troubles. The bar's location on the second floor meant that patrons had to take an escalator to reach the entrance, and the building's security cameras monitored everyone coming and going. The atmosphere that night was electric with the promise of spring break freedom. Students packed the bar, laughing and toasting to their temporary escape from the pressures of university life. Brian and Clint ordered their first round of drinks and settled in for what they expected to be a fun but relatively low-key evening of bar hopping around campus. Around 10 o'clock, Brian stepped outside the bar to make a phone call to Alexis, who had already traveled to Toledo to visit her parents before their Monday morning departure for Miami. The conversation was typical of two people deeply in love and excited about their upcoming romantic getaway. Brian's voice was full of warmth and affection as he told Alexis how much he loved her and confirmed their travel plans for Monday morning. That phone call would later be remembered as the last normal conversation Brian would ever have with the woman he planned to marry. After finishing his call with Alexis, Brian rejoined Clint inside the Ugly Tuna Saloona, and the two friends continued drinking and catching up on their plans for spring break. The music was loud, the crowd was energetic, and the atmosphere was exactly what Brian needed to forget about the stress of medical school and the grief he was still processing over his mother's death. As the night progressed, Brian and Clint decided to explore other bars in the area, beginning a crawl through some of Columbus's most popular student hangouts. Their first stop was in the Arena District, where they continued their celebration with shots of hard liquor and more drinks. According to Clint's later testimony to police, each man had exactly one shot at every bar they visited, a detail that would become important during the investigation into Brian's disappearance. The two friends worked their way through several establishments, enjoying the camaraderie that comes from shared experiences and the bond of friendship forged through the challenging world of medical school. Brian seemed relaxed and happy, finally able to let his guard down after months of intense academic pressure and emotional upheaval. Their bar hopping eventually led them to the Short North, a trendy area of Columbus known for its vibrant nightlife and eclectic mix of restaurants and drinking establishments. It was there, sometime after midnight, that they encountered Meredith Reed, a friend of Clint's, who offered to give them a ride back to where their evening had started. Meredith Reed was a local woman who knew Clint from previous social gatherings, and she was happy to help the two medical students get back to the Ugly Tuna Saloona safely. The three of them piled into her car, and she drove them back to the South Campus Gateway complex, where the Ugly Tuna Saloona was located. The ride was filled with the kind of light-hearted conversation and laughter that characterizes a good night out among friends. Security cameras outside the Ugly Tuna Saloona captured all three of them riding the escalator to the bar's second-floor entrance at exactly 1:15 in the morning. The footage shows Brian appearing relaxed and in good spirits, chatting easily with his companions as they made their way back to the bar where their evening had begun. There was nothing in his demeanor to suggest that anything was wrong or that he was planning to disappear. Once inside the Ugly Tuna Saloona for the second time that night, the three friends ordered another round of drinks and continued their celebration. The bar was still crowded with students and other patrons enjoying their Friday night, and the energy level remained high despite the late hour. Brian, Clint, and Meredith found a spot where they could continue their conversation and enjoy their drinks. For reasons that remain unclear to this day, Brian separated from his companions while they were inside the bar. Neither Clint nor Meredith noticed exactly when he left their group, and they assumed he had simply gone to the restroom or stepped outside for some fresh air. The music was loud, the crowd was thick, and it would have been easy for someone to slip away without being immediately noticed. At 1:55 in the morning, security cameras captured Brian outside the Ugly Tuna Saloona, engaged in what appeared to be a casual and friendly conversation with two young women. The footage shows him looking relaxed and comfortable, displaying none of the signs of distress or agitation that might suggest he was in danger or planning to disappear voluntarily. The conversation appeared to be the kind of innocent social interaction that happens countless times every night outside bars and clubs across America. After a brief chat with the two women, Brian was seen saying goodbye to them in a manner that suggested the conversation was ending naturally. He then walked away from the women and moved off camera, presumably heading back toward the entrance of the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The security cameras tracked his movement until he disappeared from view, walking in the direction of the bar's escalator entrance. That footage, captured at 1:55 in the morning on April 1, 2006, represents the last confirmed sighting of Brian Shaffer. What happened in the minutes that followed would become one of the most baffling mysteries in modern criminal investigation, launching an 18-year search for answers that continues to this day. Inside the bar, Clint and Meredith continued enjoying their drinks, occasionally looking around for Brian, but not immediately concerned about his absence. They tried calling his cell phone several times throughout the night, but their calls went straight to voicemail. As experienced bargoers, they knew that cell phone reception could be spotty in crowded venues, and they assumed Brian would rejoin them before the night was over. When the Ugly Tuna Saloona announced last call and began the process of closing at 2 o'clock in the morning, Clint and Meredith started looking more seriously for Brian. They searched the bar, checked the restrooms, and asked other patrons if they had seen their friend. Despite their growing concern, they still believed there was a logical explanation for Brian's absence. As the bar emptied and patrons filed out through the main entrance, Clint and Meredith positioned themselves outside the building to wait for Brian. They watched every person leave the establishment, convinced that Brian would emerge at any moment with an explanation for where he had been. The minutes ticked by, but Brian never appeared among the departing crowd. When the last patron left the Ugly Tuna Saloona and the staff began closing procedures, Clint and Meredith were forced to confront the possibility that something had gone wrong. They continued calling Brian's phone, but every call went directly to voicemail. Growing increasingly worried, they decided to drive to Brian's apartment on King Avenue, hoping to find him there with a reasonable explanation for his disappearance. The discovery that would send shockwaves through the investigation came when Columbus police detectives began reviewing the security camera footage from the South Campus Gateway building on Monday morning, April 3, 2006. What they found defied every expectation and challenged the fundamental laws of physics in ways that continue to baffle investigators 18 years later. The security system at the South Campus Gateway complex was comprehensive and modern, designed to monitor all public areas of the building for safety and security purposes. Multiple cameras covered the main entrance, the escalator leading to the second floor, the corridors, and the exits. The system was functioning perfectly on the night of Brian's disappearance, capturing clear footage of everyone who entered and left the building. Detective after detective watched the footage, rewinding and reviewing the same sequences over and over again, searching for any sign of Brian leaving the building. The cameras clearly showed him riding the escalator with Clint and Meredith at 1:15 in the morning. They captured him outside the bar at 1:55, talking with the two young women. They recorded him walking off camera toward the bar entrance. But from that moment forward, Brian Shaffer simply vanished. Every single person who left the Ugly Tuna Saloona that night was recorded by the security cameras. Every single person except Brian. The footage showed a steady stream of patrons departing when the bar closed at 2 o'clock. But Brian was not among them. Investigators watched the cameras from every angle, checking and double-checking their findings, but the conclusion was unavoidable. Brian had entered the building but never left. The impossibility of the situation sent investigators into overdrive. They brought in technical experts to examine the camera system, searching for blind spots or malfunctions that might explain how someone could leave the building undetected. The cameras were working perfectly, with no gaps in coverage or technical failures. One camera continuously panned the area, while another was manually operated, meaning that any movement should have been captured. Columbus police immediately launched one of the largest missing persons investigations in the city's history. More than 50 officers were assigned to the case, working around the clock to find any trace of Brian Shaffer. They began by conducting intensive searches of the South Campus Gateway building, looking for any possible way Brian could have left without being detected by cameras. The building did have one alternative exit besides the main entrance monitored by security cameras. A service door, typically used only by staff and not accessible to the general public, was located a short distance from where Brian was last seen on camera. However, this exit led to a first-floor hallway that connected to an active construction zone with its own exterior exit. Investigators examined this potential escape route extensively, but they found it highly unlikely that Brian could have successfully navigated it while intoxicated. The construction area was filled with debris, equipment, and hazardous materials that would have been dangerous even for a sober person to traverse in the dark. The path would have required climbing over obstacles and finding his way through a maze of construction materials, something that seemed nearly impossible for someone who had been drinking for several hours. The search expanded rapidly beyond the building itself. Columbus police deployed cadaver dogs to scour the surrounding area, searching dumpsters, construction sites, and any location where a body might be concealed. They convinced the city to allow them access to the sewage system beneath Columbus, conducting an extensive underground search that yielded no trace of Brian. Officers canvassed the neighborhood surrounding South Campus Gateway, interviewing residents and business owners to see if anyone had witnessed anything unusual on the night of April 1st. They posted flyers throughout the area featuring Brian's photograph and distinctive physical characteristics, including his Pearl Jam tattoo and a unique fleck in one of his irises. The investigation took on an almost surreal quality as investigators struggled to reconcile the physical evidence with the apparent impossibility of Brian's disappearance. They brought in experts in building security, video analysis, and even consulting engineers to examine every possible explanation for how someone could enter a building and never leave. Polygraph tests were administered to everyone who had been with Brian that night. His father Randy passed his test, as did Meredith Reed and all other individuals who were questioned. However, Clint Florence, Brian's roommate and the last person known to have spent significant time with him that night, refused to take a polygraph test on the advice of his attorney. This refusal would later become a source of significant speculation and suspicion in the case. Interestingly, the two women who were captured on camera talking with Brian just before his disappearance were identified by investigators several years later, but they reported that they had never been asked to take polygraph tests. This oversight would later be criticized by those following the case, as their conversation with Brian represented his last known human interaction. As the investigation progressed, bizarre developments continued to emerge that deepened the mystery rather than providing answers. In September of 2006, 5 months after Brian's disappearance, Alexis received a shocking surprise when she called Brian's cell phone, as she had done every night since he vanished. Instead of going straight to voicemail as it always had, the phone actually rang 3 times before disconnecting. Alexis was so startled by hearing the phone ring that she called back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail again. She continued calling throughout the night, desperately hoping to hear those rings again, but the phone returned to its usual pattern of going directly to voicemail. When investigators contacted Singular, Brian's wireless provider, they were told that the ringing could have been caused by a computer glitch in their system. However, the phone company also revealed that a ping from Brian's phone had been detected at a cell tower in Hilliard, Ohio, 14 miles northwest of Columbus. This discovery opened up entirely new possibilities and areas of investigation, but it also raised more questions than it answered. How could Brian's phone have generated a signal 14 miles away when he had disappeared from downtown Columbus? Was someone else using his phone, or had Brian somehow traveled to that location? The ping in Hilliard led to extensive searches of that area, with investigators combing through rural areas, abandoned buildings, and any location where Brian might be hiding or where his body might be concealed. Despite their efforts, no trace of Brian was found in Hilliard or the surrounding areas. 2 years after Brian's disappearance, another devastating blow struck the Shaffer family when Brian's father Randy was killed in a freak accident during a windstorm in September of 2008. Randy had been clearing debris from his yard in Baltimore, Ohio, when a tree branch broke loose and fatally struck him. Neighbors discovered his body the following day. After Randy's obituary was published online, something extraordinary happened that briefly raised hopes that Brian might still be alive. A condolence message appeared in the online guestbook that simply read, "To Dad, love Brian, U.S. Virgin Islands." The message suggested that Brian was alive and living in the Caribbean, possibly having started the new life he had always dreamed of in a tropical location. However, further investigation revealed that the message had been posted from a computer with public access in Franklin County, Ohio, the same county where Brian had disappeared. The message was determined to be a cruel hoax, dashing the family's hopes and adding another layer of pain to their ongoing grief. 18 years have passed since Brian Shaffer walked into the Ugly Tuna Saloona and vanished into one of America's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. Yet the case remains as baffling today as it was on that April morning, when investigators first realized that someone had seemingly defied the laws of physics by entering a building and never leaving. The Columbus Police Department continues to work the case actively, with Detective Andre Edwards now overseeing the investigation as part of the Missing Persons Unit. Detective Edwards and his team still receive tips and leads on a regular basis, following up on every piece of information, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. The department has made it clear that the case will never be closed until Brian is found or definitive answers are provided about his fate. In March of 2021, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation released an age progression photograph showing how Brian might look today at 42 years old. The image, created by forensic artists using advanced computer modeling, shows a mature version of Brian, with graying hair and the natural aging that would have occurred over 15 years. The release of this photograph generated renewed media attention and public interest in the case, leading to hundreds of new tips and potential sightings. One of the most significant developments in recent years occurred in 2020, when a photograph began circulating on social media, showing a homeless man in Tijuana, Mexico, who bore a striking resemblance to Brian Shaffer. The image sparked intense speculation among true crime enthusiasts and those following Brian's case, with many people convinced that the man in the photograph was the missing medical student. The photograph was sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for analysis using their most advanced facial recognition software. Detective Tucker, who was handling the case at the time, admitted that her hopes were high that the photograph might finally provide the breakthrough the case needed. However, after 4 weeks of intensive analysis, the FBI concluded that the homeless man in the photograph was not Brian Shaffer, representing another dead end in the long search for answers. The technology and investigative techniques available to law enforcement have advanced dramatically since 2006, offering new possibilities for solving cold cases that once seemed hopeless. DNA analysis has become more sophisticated, cell phone tracking has improved exponentially, and facial recognition software can now identify individuals from photographs taken decades apart. Despite these advances, the Brian Shaffer case continues to resist solution. Current investigators believe that someone who was interviewed during the original investigation is withholding crucial information about what happened that night. Detective Tucker has stated her intention to re-interview witnesses and persons of interest, hoping that the passage of time might have changed someone's willingness to come forward with the truth. She believes that the answer to Brian's disappearance lies with someone who has already been questioned but has not told the complete truth. The case has generated enormous interest in the true crime community, spawning podcasts, television documentaries, and countless online discussions about what might have happened to Brian. His disappearance has been featured on national television programs and has its own Wikipedia page documenting the various theories and developments in the case. The story has become a touchstone for discussions about the limitations of modern surveillance technology and the reality that people can still vanish without a trace in our connected world. Theories about Brian's fate range from the mundane to the extraordinary. Some investigators believe he may have suffered an accident while intoxicated, and his body was somehow concealed or disposed of in a way that has prevented its discovery. Others speculate that he voluntarily disappeared to escape the pressures of medical school and his grief over his mother's death, possibly starting a new life under a different identity. More sinister theories suggest that Brian was the victim of foul play, possibly killed by someone he knew or encountered that night. The fact that his roommate Clint Florence refused to take a polygraph test has led to ongoing speculation about his potential involvement, although no evidence has ever been found to support these suspicions. Florence has maintained his innocence and has stated through his attorney that he has shared everything he knows about that night. The two women who spoke with Brian just before his disappearance remain persons of interest, although they have never been publicly identified or questioned extensively about their conversation with him. Their brief interaction with Brian represents the last known human contact he had before vanishing, making their testimony potentially crucial to understanding what happened. Brian's younger brother Derek has continued the search for answers, working with private investigators and maintaining a presence on social media to keep his brother's case in the public eye. Derek has stated that he will never give up looking for Brian or seeking the truth about what happened that night. The family has endured unimaginable pain, losing first their mother Renee to cancer, then Brian to mysterious circumstances, and finally Randy to a tragic accident. Central Ohio Crime Stoppers maintains a reward of $100,000 for information leading to Brian's whereabouts or the resolution of his case. The substantial reward reflects the community's ongoing interest in finding answers and the family's determination to learn the truth about what happened to their loved one. The passage of 18 years has not diminished the impact of Brian's disappearance on those who knew him or the investigators who have worked his case. His girlfriend Alexis Wagoner has moved forward with her life, completing medical school and building a career as a physician, but those close to her say she has never fully recovered from losing the man she expected to marry. The case serves as a sobering reminder of the limitations of modern technology and the reality that mysteries can still occur in our surveillance-heavy society. Despite multiple cameras, cell phone tracking, and intensive police work, Brian Shaffer simply vanished, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak. For those who believe in the possibility that Brian is still alive somewhere, the hope remains that he might one day contact his family or be recognized by someone who sees his photograph. The age progression images and ongoing media coverage keep his face before the public, maintaining the possibility that someone might spot him and provide the breakthrough that has eluded investigators for nearly 2 decades. The Brian Shaffer case represents one of the most confounding disappearances in modern American history, a puzzle that has stumped some of the nation's best investigators and continues to generate new theories and speculation with each passing year. Whether Brian chose to disappear, fell victim to foul play, or encountered some other fate may never be known, but his case will continue to captivate and mystify until the truth is finally revealed. If you found this case as shocking as we did, make sure to subscribe to Criminal Mind Cortex for more incredible true crime cases that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the limits of modern investigation. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest explorations into the most mind-bending mysteries from around the world. The truth is out there, and together we will keep searching for answers to cases like Brian Shaffer's that remind us how much we still do not understand about the world around us.